Hey everyone, Mr. Newman here. Today we're just going to do a quick practice quiz for our quadratic formula quiz. First of all, I'm going to give you the quadratic formula. You need to solve each equation with that. You also have to show your work, which in the case of calculators means you need to at least write down the quadratic formula with the values of A, B, and C plugged in. And lastly, make sure if it applies, you give exact answers. That means don't just type it in the calculator if you get a decimal that is rounding. And I'll show you what that looks like on number 2. So, for the first thing you need to do is identify A, B, and C. This is already in standard form, so I know that A is my 2, B is my -5, and C is -18. So we're going to write out the quadratic formula right here. That's this thing right here. And I'm going to put in the opposite of B, that's negative, parentheses, -5, plus or minus the square root of B squared, minus 4 times A, times C, all divided by 2 times A. Now notice a few things. I put everything in parentheses. What does this mean, or what can I do? Well, the first thing I might want to try is plug it into the calculator. And how do you plug that plus or minus in the calculator? Well, you plug in everything with a plus, and then you plug in everything with a minus where that plus and minus are. And those are two different entries in the calculator. Excuse me. When you plug in the first one, you get 9/2 or 4.5. When you plug in the second one, you get -2. And those are the two solutions. Since those are exact, I don't have to worry about rounding or anything. Those are my exact answers, and I'm done. For the second problem, notice I'm not in standard form right now. I need to have my equation equal to 0 if I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So let's subtract 7x from both sides, and when I do that, now my equation is equal to 0. Notice I also put the -7x in the middle, so it's written in standard form. So that means A is 8, B is -7, and C is -12. So let's plug it into the quadratic formula. This time I wrote out the whole quadratic formula, but I put parentheses where the A, B, and C are. That might be a good strategy if you get confused on how to do where to plug in the A, B, and C. So we got that quadratic formula written. B is -7, so I'm going to put -7 in the two spots where B is. I'm going to substitute 8 in for A, and I'm going to put, instead of C, I'm going to put the -12, and it's 2 times A on the bottom again. Now, if I type this into the calculator, I have a plus and a minus. But if I type that first one into the calculator, I get 1.7388 ... That is not an acceptable answer because it's not exact. So we can't just type this in the calculator. We have to be a little clever about how we type it in. The calculator. Whenever you get a decimal or a decimal that keeps on going forever, it's usually because this square root is not a perfect square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in that thing under the square root. We call that the discriminant. Type in that and see what we get and just fill it in. So on the right here, I know that I get -7 is +7, but that discriminant is equal to 433. So I'm going to write the square root of 433. Of course, in the denominator, in the bottom, you get 2 times 8, so that's 16. And so my final answer is going to be 7 plus the square root of 433 all over 16. I can stop right there because this is not a perfect square. There's no perfect squares inside of it, so that's as exact as I'm going to get. You're allowed to write it out twice like that, or you can write it with the plus or minus, 7 plus or minus the square root of 433 all over 16, and that is our final answer. For the last problem, two students, Alice and Bob, are arguing about the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, for this equation, x squared minus 4x plus 4. Bob says the discriminant is 1 because there's one solution. Alice says the discriminant is 0 because there's one solution. Who's correct? Well, first of all, let's talk about the discriminant. Remember, the discriminant is that thing under the square root of the quadratic formula. So, if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, that means that number is going to be positive, so we're going to have plus a number and minus a number, so that's going to be two solutions. If b squared minus 4ac, if the discriminant is negative, that means it's less than 0, that means you're taking the square root of a negative number and you're going to have no real solutions, so 0 solutions. If, however, b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, Because plus 0 and minus 0 are the same thing, then you're going to have only one solution. So let's find the discriminant of our quadratic equation here. We get b squared minus 4ac. b is negative 4. That squared minus 4 times 1, which is a, times 4, which is c. That gives me 0 when I type it in the calculator. So it looks like Alice is correct because the discriminant is 0. You just have to remember, if the discriminant is 0, that doesn't mean there are no solutions. That means that there is one solution. Thank you very much for watching.